The bullies taunted the quiet, nerdy boy until an ex-convict intervened. What happened next shocked everyone. Subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. The Greyhound bus coughed to a stop on the edge of town just as the sun was beginning to rise behind the low, humid hills of Grayville, Louisiana. The cracked asphalt steamed gently from the morning dew, and the silence of dawn clung to the rusted street signs and leaning fences like a hush of judgment. Jonathan Brooks stepped down from the bus with nothing more than a duffel bag slung over his shoulder, the calloused fingers of his right hand tightening briefly around the strap as he squinted into the sleepy emptiness of the place he had once called home. 10 years had passed since he had last stood here. 10 long, carved-out years behind steel bars, fluorescent lights, and the bone-deep echo of slamming cell doors. The world hadn't changed much, at least not in this town. The same sagging storefronts lined Main Street, the same pickup trucks coughed their way down the narrow roads, and the same looks of quiet suspicion stirred behind curtains in second-floor windows. Grayville didn't forget easily, and forgiveness in these parts was harder to find than a summer breeze in August. Jonathan walked. He didn't expect anyone to meet him. His mother had passed 4 years into his sentence, cancer stealing her away before he could say goodbye. His younger brother, who'd moved out west, had long since stopped riding. The trailer that once sat proud at the end of Willow Lane now leaned tiredly into the wind like an old man who knew his time was up. He found the key still hidden behind the loose brick in the crumbling step, just like his mother had always done, and let himself into silence, dust, and the faint scent of lavender air freshener she had stubbornly used even when her health had begun to fail. The inside of the trailer hadn't changed much. The wallpaper still peeled at the corners, the kitchen faucet still dripped, and the old recliner, his mother's favorite, still sat facing the window that looked out over the dusty front yard. He dropped his bag by the door and stood there for a long moment, letting the quiet soak into his skin like humidity. He was free. But freedom, it seemed, was not a feeling that came all at once. By the end of the day, he'd made his way to the employment center on the outskirts of town. A sour-faced woman behind the desk handed him a clipboard without looking up. Ex-convicts were no rarity here, but that didn't mean they were welcome. He filled out forms with steady, blocky letters and answered questions in a voice that was deeper and rougher than it had been at 25. By some twist of mercy or policy, he was offered a temporary job as a school maintenance worker. The pay was low, but the position came with structure, and structure, they told him, was good for men like him. The next morning, he reported to Grayville Elementary. The building itself was old and cracked around the edges, but it stood with the kind of stubborn pride that matched the town. Inside, the hallways smelled of disinfectant and chalk, and the floors shone under buzzing fluorescent lights. Jonathan received a navy work shirt with Mr. Brooks stitched over the chest in faded white thread. A janitor named Lewis, wiry and perpetually chewing a toothpick, showed him around in silence. Later that day, Jonathan was told to fix a locker hinge near the 5th grade classrooms. Kneeling down with his toolkit, he focused on the rusted bolts, unaware at first of the commotion brewing just down the hallway. Raised voices, laughter, sharp and cruel, echoed toward him. When he looked up, he saw a small group of boys gathered in a loose circle, and in the center of it all stood a child, thin, dark-skinned, and visibly shaking. Jonathan didn't recognize him, but the sight hit him in a place deeper than memory. The boy wore thick glasses that sat crooked on his nose, his shirt half untucked and smudged with something that looked like ketchup or maybe paint. One of the older boys snatched the backpack from his hands and hurled it across the floor. Another tripped him as he scrambled to pick it up. They laughed. Not in amusement, but with that uniquely vicious glee children could wield like a blade when no one was watching. Jonathan stood, the screwdriver in his hand still clenched. Something inside him flared, an old instinct, hot and reflexive. He took a step forward before stopping himself. He wasn't allowed to get involved. There were rules now. Violations meant reports. Reports meant risk. But when one of the boys shoved the kid hard against the lockers, Jonathan's decision made itself. His voice cut through the hallway like a whip. "That's enough." The children froze. The tallest one, probably the leader, turned first, trying to size him up. Jonathan was a tall man, broad across the chest, and still carried the weight of his time inside in the way he stood, how he held his shoulders. The boy's confidence faltered. One by one, the others peeled away and vanished around the corner, leaving the bullied boy to kneel alone, collecting his scattered books and papers. Jonathan approached slowly, crouching nearby but not too close. "You all right?" he asked. The boy didn't answer, just nodded once, barely perceptibly, and clutched his backpack to his chest. Jonathan wanted to say something else, reassure him, maybe, but the boy stood and hurried away before the words came. That night, Jonathan couldn't sleep. He lay on the worn-out cot in the corner of his mother's old bedroom, the ceiling fan ticking slowly above him. The image of the boy stuck in his mind. There had been something about him. Not just the bullying, though that alone had made Jonathan's fists clench. It was the silence. The way the boy hadn't cried or yelled. He'd simply taken it as if he expected nothing else. The next day, he learned the boy's name was Noah. Noah Jefferson. Quiet kid, top of his class, lived with his grandmother on the edge of town. No friends to speak of, that was all anyone knew. The teachers mostly liked him. They said he was sweet, if a little odd, but none of them seemed surprised when Jonathan mentioned what he'd seen. "Boys will be boys," one of them said with a shrug. The words made Jonathan's stomach turn. Over the following week, he saw Noah several more times. Always alone. Always carrying books too heavy for his frame. Always ducking into corners or slipping down side halls when the bell rang. And though Noah never acknowledged him beyond a shy glance, Jonathan began to nod each time they passed. A small gesture, but one he hoped meant something. On Friday afternoon, as students filed out of the school building, Jonathan lingered near the front entrance, fixing a broken handle on one of the doors. As he packed up his tools, he noticed Noah sitting alone on the curb, clutching a brown paper lunch bag untouched. Buses roared past. Children laughed and shouted, and still Noah sat, head bowed, eyes hidden behind lenses too big for his small face. Something in Jonathan cracked. He crossed the distance between them and crouched down. "You waiting for someone?" he asked. Noah shook his head. "Walk home." "Long walk?" No reply. Jonathan looked down at the lunch bag. "You didn't eat?" Noah shrugged. "You know," Jonathan said slowly, "my mom used to make me fried bologna sandwiches. I hated them. Used to trade them for pudding cups." A flicker of amusement, barely there, touched the edge of Noah's mouth. Jonathan stood. "Come on, I'll walk with you a bit." Noah hesitated, then stood too. They didn't talk much on the way. Jonathan didn't ask questions, and Noah didn't offer. But they walked, side by side beneath the long shadows of the late afternoon sun, as the cicadas began to sing and the air thickened with summer heat. When they reached the corner near Willow Lane, Noah stopped. "My house is that way," he said quietly, pointing down a gravel path overgrown with weeds. Jonathan nodded. "All right." You get home safe." Noah paused. "Thank you." It was barely above a whisper, but it was enough. Jonathan watched him go, his small frame vanishing into the shadows of the trees. Then he turned and walked home, the first real smile in years beginning to tug at the corners of his mouth. He didn't know what he was doing. He didn't know if it was right or smart or allowed, but he knew this. He had seen a child left behind by everyone else, and for the first time in a long time he didn't want to look away. Noah's world was small, but not by choice. His life, neatly folded between the walls of his grandmother's house and the far end of the school library, moved in quiet rhythms, uninterrupted by laughter or companionship. The days bled together like ink and water, always the same soft hum of solitude, the same hollow silence after the final school bell rang and the other kids disappeared in clusters of laughter and sneakers thudding against pavement. Noah never ran. He walked, always alone, always looking down, his books hugged tightly to his chest like armor. Ella Jefferson had taken him in after her daughter died. Noah had only been 5 when the cancer took her, too young to remember the smell of the hospital room, but old enough to remember how quiet the house had become afterward. Ella was kind, stern, and weary in the way of someone who had already raised her children and thought her years of caretaking were behind her. Still, she made oatmeal in the mornings, kept the house clean, and read to Noah every night until he was old enough to read to himself. She didn't understand his obsession with the stars or his growing collection of insect specimens, but she didn't discourage it either. "You've got a mind," she would say. "That's something they can't take from you." Noah clung to that sentence like a raft in the current. The kids at school saw him as strange. He didn't play sports. He hated dodgeball and refused to run during recess. He liked books, thick ones with long, winding sentences and pictures of galaxies on the covers. He corrected teachers when they made mistakes. He asked too many questions. His voice was soft, and his eyes too big behind the glasses he pushed up nervously every few minutes. He was different, and different was dangerous in a place like Grayville. The bullying started early. First it was whispers and stolen pencils. Then it escalated to cruel notes shoved into his locker, glue in his chair, trash thrown in his backpack. He never fought back. He simply endured, clinging to his notebooks and his quiet, private world of stars and leaves. Sometimes he wrote about it in his journals, filing his pain under carefully labeled entries, as if documenting it could make it more manageable. He never told Ella. She had enough to worry about: her medicine, the bills, her aching legs. Besides, Noah had already learned that some adults didn't listen, or worse, didn't care. It was on a Monday morning that he saw the tall man again, the one who had helped him the other week. Mr. Brooks, the janitor. Most adults looked at Noah the way people look at static on a television, slightly annoyed, eyes sliding past. But Mr. Brooks looked directly at him, not with pity, not even with curiosity. Just calm attention. Noah had seen him near the broken lockers and once wiping graffiti from the boys' bathroom. He didn't talk much, but when he did, his voice was deep and quiet like rolling thunder. That afternoon, Noah lingered near the school garden during recess, where a few kids went. He knelt beside a patch of dying marigolds and traced the brittle stems with his fingers. He liked plants. They didn't talk, they didn't laugh. They just grew, reaching for the sun, even when no one noticed. He was sketching the outline of a wilted leaf in his notebook when Mr. Brooks walked by, pushing a squeaky cart full of cleaning supplies. Their eyes met briefly. Mr. Brooks gave a small nod. Noah, without thinking, reached into his backpack and pulled out a folded slip of paper. He hesitated, then stepped forward. "I read that book," he said, almost too quietly. Mr. Brooks stopped. "Which one?" "The one about the baobab tree. You left it on the bench last week." Jonathan raised an eyebrow. "And?" "It was interesting," Noah said. "They can hold thousands of gallons of water. Some can live more than 1,000 years. They're sometimes called trees of life." There was a pause. Then, to Noah's surprise, Mr. Brooks smiled. "You've got a good memory," he said. Noah shrugged. "I like learning about things." From that day, a quiet exchange began between them. They never sat and talked, not really, but Mr. Brooks would leave small things for him, an old science magazine, a page from a carpentry manual, once even a pocket field guide to southern birds. In return, Noah would leave notes in careful handwriting. "Thanks. The owl on page 12 has asymmetrical ears for locating prey. That's cool." Or, "Did you know Venus spins the opposite direction of Earth?" It was a strange, tentative dance of trust. No promises, no expectations, just small gestures building slowly into something more. At home, Ella noticed a change. Noah came home less hunched. He hummed under his breath when he washed dishes. He still didn't talk much about school, but there was something new in his eyes, something soft and cautious. One evening, after dinner, she handed him a warm slice of cornbread and sat down across from him at the kitchen table. Her movements were slow now, her joints stiff. The sugar levels were getting harder to control, and her medicine left her tired most days. "You've been quieter than usual," she said. Noah looked up. "I'm always quiet." "I know, but this is a different kind, not the sad kind." He hesitated. "There's a man at school. He fixes things. He gave me a book." Ella narrowed her eyes. "What kind of man?" "He works there. He's nice. I think he likes trees, too." She let out a breath. "All right, just be careful, baby." Noah didn't understand the warning. Not really, but he nodded. That night, he looked out his window and wondered if Mr. Brooks liked the stars, too. As the days passed, their silent bond grew. Mr. Brooks helped fix the broken lock on Noah's bike after school. He showed him how to adjust the gears and oil the chain. Noah listened intently, asking quiet questions, his eyes flicking from Jonathan's hands to the tools and back again. There was something grounding about the older man's presence, something steady. One afternoon, as they were working behind the school near the old storage shed, Jonathan spoke for the first time in a while. "You know," he said, wiping grease from his fingers, "when I was your age, I wanted to be an architect." Noah looked up, startled. "Really?" "Yeah, loved buildings, shapes. I used to draw bridges and towers on napkins. Got a scholarship, too. But then," he paused, his jaw tightening, "things got complicated." Noah didn't press, but that night he searched the library for books on architecture. A week later, he left one in Jonathan's toolbox with a sticky note. "Thought you might like this. Page 34 talks about suspension bridges. They're cool." Jonathan chuckled when he found it. "Kids got heart," he muttered. Not everyone approved of their connection. Mrs. Langley, the front office secretary, eyed them with suspicion. She mentioned it to the principal, who called Jonathan in for a brief reminder about boundaries. "We appreciate your initiative," the principal had said, "but let's make sure we're keeping things strictly professional." Jonathan nodded, swallowing his frustration. Meanwhile, the boys who had bullied Noah grew bolder. They didn't like the attention he was getting. One of them shoved him into a locker after gym class. Another smeared jelly across his math textbook. Noah didn't say a word. He never did, But Mr. Brooks noticed the bruises. One day, he stopped Noah before lunch. "You don't have to take it, you know." Noah looked down. "They'll just do worse." Jonathan didn't argue. He knew that kind of logic. He'd lived it. That weekend, Jonathan passed by the bookstore on Main Street. His eyes caught on a display of field journals, thick, spiral-bound with sturdy covers. He bought one and tucked a note inside. "For your thoughts, or stars, or leaves, or whatever you want." On Monday, he slipped it into Noah's locker. Noah found it after third period. He opened the cover, read the note, and for the first time in a long while, smiled in a way that reached his eyes. That afternoon, Jonathan saw him sitting under the sycamore tree by the school fence, scribbling something inside the journal. He didn't disturb him. He just watched, arms folded as the boy wrote with furrowed brows and slow, deliberate care. That night, Noah added a new entry to his old, tattered notebook. "I'm not sure what Mr. Brooks was before, but I think he's someone who knows what it feels like to be invisible, and maybe that's why he sees me." The days stretched on, warm and golden, the air thick with the smell of cut grass and blooming dogwood. Spring gave way to early summer, and still the bond between them deepened, wordless but certain. Neither of them said it aloud, but they had found something precious. Two lives bruised by silence, reaching out across the space between them. And, for the first time in years, neither of them felt completely alone. The transition between spring and summer in Grayville came not with sudden heat or bloom and color, but with a slow, heavy stillness that pressed down like a thick wool blanket. Trees seemed to sigh under their own weight, and the air grew syrupy and humid, clinging to the skin. For Jonathan and Noah, the season unfolded with cautious optimism. Their connection, once made of tentative glances and silent exchanges, had begun to take root in something stronger, something resembling trust. But in Grayville, even the simplest of human bonds didn't go unnoticed for long, especially not when they crossed boundaries most people here never dared to acknowledge. Noah had begun to blossom under the attention. Though he was still reserved, still quiet, there was a new steadiness to the way he moved through the world. He no longer shrank from shadows in the hallway. His steps, once hesitant, had purpose. His gaze met others with a flicker of calm defiance. And, more than anything, he began to smile. Not often, not broadly, but genuinely and without shame. The journal Jonathan had given him was now half full of drawings, diagrams, thoughts, and small, vulnerable questions he never voiced aloud. He had even included a page titled "Things I Wish I Could Ask Mr. Brooks," followed by a numbered list of questions in his tidy handwriting. It was after school on a Wednesday when he approached Jonathan near the back of the school building, where the older man was repairing a broken storage cabinet. Noah held out a slip of paper with a schedule drawn in colored pencil. "It's the science fair," he said. "I'm presenting my project on Friday. It's about plant memory and response to stimuli." Jonathan wiped his hands on a rag and took the paper, inspecting it carefully. "Plant memory?" "Yeah. Some plants can't remember and adapt to things, like Mimosa pudica. It closes its leaves when touched, but if it learns the stimulus isn't dangerous, it stops reacting." Jonathan raised an eyebrow. "So, like plants that learn not to flinch?" "Exactly." There was a beat of silence. "You want me to come?" Jonathan asked. Noah nodded. "If you can." Jonathan folded the paper and tucked it into his shirt pocket. Wouldn't miss it. But the days leading up to the fair were less than kind. The other boys noticed the way Noah smiled more. They noticed how Mr. Brooks walked with him sometimes, or helped him carry a project board to class, or sat beside him beneath the sycamore tree during lunch breaks. And in the eyes of boys raised to mirror their fathers, there was only one conclusion to draw. Something was wrong with this friendship, something unnatural. The leader of the group, a boy named Wyatt, tall for his age with a permanent smirk and the kind of confidence only inherited, took it upon himself to correct the imbalance. He began with the subtle jabs, whispered slurs in the hallway, mocking imitations of Noah's voice. Then came the notes. Poorly drawn caricatures left in Noah's desk, depicting him holding hands with Mr. Brooks surrounded by flames. Noah tried to ignore them. He said nothing to Jonathan, afraid the man might lose his job or get in trouble because of him. But the stress bled into his behavior. His sleep grew fitful. He started arriving later, lingering in the bathroom to avoid hallways, his hands trembling slightly as he turned the pages of his textbook. Ella noticed too. "You look pale, baby," she said one morning. "You sick?" Noah only shook his head. The night before the science fair, he couldn't eat. He sat by the window with his telescope, staring at the moon as if it might offer answers. Across town, Jonathan sat at his kitchen table, staring at the hand-drawn schedule, the note crumpled slightly from being carried in his pocket all week. He knew something was wrong. Noah's face had taken on the old shadows again, the ones he'd worked so hard to erase. But every time he tried to ask, the boy deflected, smiled, and changed the subject. Friday arrived sticky and hot. The school cafeteria had been transformed into a makeshift exhibition hall, with tables lined up in rows, each one adorned with poster boards, models, and curious gadgets. Parents began arriving, many with cameras or toddlers in tow. Jonathan, dressed in a clean button-up shirt and his best jeans, stood near the back, scanning the room until he found Noah's display. It was modest, but detailed. A live mimosa plant sat in a pot next to a diagram showing its reactions to repeated stimuli. A small binder held Noah's handwritten observations and charts. The poster board was decorated with careful lettering and watercolor leaves. Jonathan approached just as Wyatt and his group passed by. He caught the end of a cruel joke, something about flower boys and janitor daddies, and saw the way Noah's spine stiffened. But the boy said nothing. He straightened his glasses, took a breath, and turned toward his plant. Jonathan's jaw clenched, but he forced himself to stay calm. "You really did all this yourself?" he asked, eyes on the display. Noah nodded. "I used Grandma's timer and a touch sensor. It's not perfect, but the plant stopped reacting after about the 5th test." Jonathan studied the plant. Its leaves were indeed open, unafraid. "Looks like you taught it something." Noah smiled. "I hope so." The judges came and went. Noah answered questions with quiet precision, his words growing stronger with each visitor. Jonathan stood nearby the whole time, arms folded, a protective presence at the edge of the crowd. And when the winners were announced, Noah didn't place. He smiled anyway. He hadn't expected to win. Just being seen had been enough. But not everyone saw him with the same eyes. That Monday, Jonathan was called into the principal's office. The room was small and cool, the blinds half drawn against the sunlight. Principal Harper, a round man with thinning hair and a permanently furrowed brow, gestured for him to sit. "There have been some concerns," Harper said. Jonathan didn't move. "About what?" "Your interactions with one of our students, Noah Jefferson." Jonathan said nothing. Harper continued, clearing his throat. Some parents have expressed discomfort. They feel the nature of your connection with Noah is inappropriate. I'm sure you understand how that might look to people. Inappropriate how? Jonathan asked, his voice low. I'm not accusing you of anything, Harper said quickly. Let's not make this into something it's not, but perception matters. We can't ignore it. I'm just asking you to be mindful. Keep some distance. Jonathan stood slowly. Distance doesn't fix what's broken in this place. Harper looked down. You have a job here, Mr. Brooks. Let's make sure you keep it. Jonathan left the office with fire simmering in his chest. That afternoon, he said nothing to Noah, but his posture was stiffer, his eyes darker. The next day, Wyatt's group struck again. This time, they destroyed Noah's greenhouse project behind the school, the one he'd built with Jonathan's help. Pots shattered, plants uprooted, his notebook torn and left dangling from the fence with the words "Weirdo's Garden" scrawled in marker. Noah found it after the final bell. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He simply knelt and began gathering the pieces one by one. Jonathan saw him from across the yard and approached silently. They worked together in silence, scooping dirt and broken clay into a trash bag. I can rebuild it, Noah said finally, his voice trembling. Jonathan placed a hand on his shoulder. You shouldn't have to. That night, Jonathan stood on his porch, staring out into the dark. The town had always judged him, that wasn't new, but seeing them aim that same ugliness at a boy like Noah, someone so pure, so full of quiet strength, was more than he could bear. He picked up the phone and called Ella. Her voice was tired but warm. We need to talk, he said. She paused. I know, I've been feeling it too. What do? We keep showing up. We keep standing beside him. That's what we do. The next day, Jonathan and Noah began building a new greenhouse. Stronger this time. Reinforced, with locks and wire mesh. And when Wyatt passed by, sneering, Jonathan simply looked at him. Calm, unwavering, and the boy looked away. Some things, after all, couldn't be bullied into silence. Some things took root and grew, no matter how many times they were cut down. And Noah, like the mimosa, was learning not to flinch. The summer heat had settled over Grayville like a punishment, thick and constant. Air conditioners rattled in protest, and the scent of cut grass and engine oil clung to every open window. At Grayville Elementary, the final weeks of the term were always the same. Impatient teachers counting the days, restless students already tasting freedom and routines held together by the thinnest of threads. But for Noah Jefferson, time was not moving toward freedom. It was tightening, inch by inch, like a rope around his chest. The rebuilt greenhouse behind the school, his sanctuary, had become a target. Though the locks kept the plant safe at night, vandalism crept into other corners of his day. One morning, he opened his locker to find his science journal soaked in soda. Another afternoon, he returned from the restroom to find his backpack missing, only to discover it later in the girls' bathroom, doused in hand soap and glitter. The message was clear. He didn't belong. Jonathan tried to hide his anger, but it was visible in the lines of his jaw and the way he began walking the hallways more often, lingering near Noah's classroom during breaks, fixing things that didn't need fixing just to stay close. The two of them had developed a silent communication, glances that said more than words, the shared language of survivors. Still, the storm was building, and neither of them could stop it. The breaking point came not with words, but with a video. It was a Wednesday. Noah had been cornered in the boys' locker room after gym. He never told anyone exactly what happened, but someone filmed part of it, Wyatt and his friends pushing him into a pile of towels, laughing, while one of them held up a phone and narrated in a mocking voice, calling Noah Brooks's little pet, among other things. The video ended with someone throwing a shirt over Noah's head and the camera shaking from laughter. By Friday morning, it was everywhere. First among students, then parents. Within hours, it had reached local Facebook groups where opinions swelled like floodwater. Some were horrified, mothers furious, fathers ashamed, but others used it as fuel, not against the bullies, but against Noah and Jonathan. Comments flowed like poison, accusations, speculation, veiled racism, and outright lies. This is what happens when you let criminals near children. Where is that boy's father? I heard the janitor's been grooming him for months. Screenshots were passed hand to hand, discussed in parking lots and whispered over fences. The video was deleted quickly, but the damage had already soaked through the fabric of the town. At school, the administration moved fast. Noah was pulled into the counselor's office and asked if Jonathan had ever touched him. The boy's eyes widened in horror, and he shook his head with such vehemence that the room fell silent. But the seeds had been planted. Jonathan was summoned the same day. The principal's voice was tight and impersonal. "We're placing you on administrative leave pending an internal review," he said. "This is for your own protection as well as the school's." Jonathan stared at him across the desk. "You're firing me without firing me." "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." Outside, the sun was hot and unforgiving. Jonathan walked past rows of children who now avoided his gaze. Some stared, some whispered, but a few, just a few, looked at him with wide, worried eyes. The children always knew more than the adults believed. Noah wasn't at school that day. He hadn't returned since the incident. His absence was its own kind of punishment. At home, Ella opened the door with trembling hands. Her voice was a whisper. "It's getting worse, Jonathan." "I know." "He won't eat. He just sits in that room and draws. Won't even talk to me anymore." Jonathan stepped inside, the air heavy with the scent of cornbread and Lysol. He found Noah in his room, curled on the floor beside a pile of books, sketching the planets on the back of a torn worksheet. When he looked up, his eyes were red-rimmed and dry. "I didn't tell them anything," he said. "I know. I didn't do anything wrong." Jonathan sat down beside him. "Neither did I." Noah leaned against his side, and for a long time they just sat there in silence. By the end of the week, the school board scheduled an emergency meeting. It was held in the gymnasium, hastily arranged, folding chairs aligned in imperfect rows. Parents crowded the space, fanning themselves with printed agendas. On one side were those who believed in rules, in appearances, in control. On the other were those who had begun to question why a quiet boy and a former prisoner had become targets in the first place. Ella was there, seated in the front row, her cane resting beside her chair. She spoke when her name was called, her voice shaky but firm. "My grandson ain't never hurt a soul. He's bright, and he's kind, and y'all keep trying to crush that out of him like he's a weed. But weeds grow back. Weeds survive." Some clapped. Others rolled their eyes. Then Jonathan spoke. He stood tall, shoulders squared, and told the truth about his past, about prison, about the boy who reminded him of himself, the boy who had given him a reason to be better. "I'm not asking you to forget who I was," he said. "I'm asking you to see who I am now, and to see him not as a problem or a burden, but as a child who deserves to feel safe, a child who deserves more than what you've given him." There was silence when he finished, the kind that settles after a thunderclap. The school board didn't reinstate him, but they didn't accuse him of anything either. The principal resigned 2 weeks later, citing health reasons. Still, the damage had been done. The next morning, Ella's blood sugar dropped dangerously low. Jonathan found her collapsed in the kitchen. At the hospital, the doctor said she'd had a mild stroke. She needs rest. She can't be the only caregiver anymore, the nurse said gently. That boy needs someone who can keep up. Jonathan sat beside her hospital bed, Noah curled into a chair nearby, clutching a blanket. "She's all I have," the boy whispered. "You've got me," Jonathan said. After Ella was released, she returned home under strict orders to rest, but she didn't last long. 3 days later, Noah woke to find her cold and still in her bed. He screamed so loud the neighbors heard. Jonathan arrived minutes later, dropping the groceries on the porch when he saw the front door ajar and Noah sitting on the steps, rocking back and forth. "I didn't know what to do," the boy sobbed. "I didn't know." Jonathan held him close, heart breaking as the ambulance lights painted the yard red and blue. Ella's body was taken gently away. The house felt hollow without her, the walls echoing with the weight of her absence. At the funeral, only a handful of people came, a few teachers, an old friend from church. Noah sat in the front pew, his hands folded, his face blank. Jonathan sat beside him, his suit tight around his shoulders. Neither of them cried during the service. But afterward, as they stood by her grave, Noah clutched Jonathan's hand and wouldn't let go. That night, the state called. A woman from Child Protective Services, her voice clipped and efficient, informed Jonathan that Noah would be placed in temporary care until a permanent guardian could be found. "He has no other living relatives?" she asked. "No," Jonathan said, "only me." "But you're not legally family." "I will be." "It doesn't work that way." The next morning, they came for Noah. Jonathan drove him to the office himself, hands trembling on the wheel. When they arrived, the boy refused to get out. "Please don't leave me," he whispered. Jonathan leaned over and kissed the top of his head. "I'm not leaving. I'm just going to get you back the right way." He watched as they led him away, his small frame swallowed by the doorway. The ache in his chest felt like a fracture. At home, the silence was unbearable. Jonathan paced the floors, stared at the walls, tried to sleep but couldn't. He thought about calling the few people he trusted, but no one could help. So he did what he knew how to do. He started preparing. He cleaned the house from top to bottom. He filled out the paperwork. He contacted a lawyer. He called the counselor at the school who remembered Noah's science project and offered to write a letter of support. He did everything they told him, everything they required. But at night, when the house was dark and quiet, he still felt the absence like a wound. A week passed, then 2, and then, one morning, a letter arrived. It was from Noah, a single page, written in pencil, carefully folded. "Dear Mr. Brooks, they say I might go to a new family. I don't want to. I keep thinking about the mimosa plant, how it learned not to close. I'm trying to be like that, but it's hard. Please don't forget me. Love, Noah." Jonathan read it twice, then he pressed it to his chest and swore he never would. The days following Noah's removal bled into one another like ink across a wet page, slow, dark, and consuming. The house that had once held the sound of Ella's cane tapping across the floorboards and Noah's quiet footsteps now echoed with stillness. Jonathan couldn't stand the silence. Every morning, he brewed coffee and left it to go cold. He swept floors that didn't need sweeping, reorganized drawers, wiped down the same counter 3 times in 1 hour. The rhythm of motion was all that kept him from coming apart. He kept Noah's letter folded in his back pocket. He'd read it so many times the pencil marks had begun to fade. Each word was a bruise, a small, aching reminder of the boy he had come to care for in a way that went beyond friendship, beyond duty. Noah was his, not by blood, not by law, but in all the ways that mattered. That first week, Jonathan drove to the Child Protective Services office every day. At first, they turned him away with polite words and professional smiles. "We're reviewing the case. There are procedures that must be followed. We'll let you know when we have more information." It didn't matter how early he showed up or how long he waited in the parking lot. The answers never changed. On the 7th day, he met with a woman named Patrice Granger, a senior caseworker with sharp eyes and a voice like gravel. She looked over his file with a deep crease between her eyebrows. "You're not a relative," she said, flipping a page. "No biological connection, no adoption papers, no formal guardianship arrangement with the grandmother before her passing." "I know," Jonathan said. He sat stiffly in the metal chair across from her, sweat gathering at the base of his neck. "You have a criminal record. I served my time." "Doesn't erase it," she said, without cruelty but with finality. Jonathan's fingers tightened around the edges of his jeans. "I've been clean for 10 years. I work. I pay rent. I'm not asking for a favor. I'm asking to be allowed to protect him." Patrice looked at him a long time. "You understand how rare it is for someone in your position to be granted custody?" "I don't care about the odds," he replied. "Tell me what I need to do." And so began the process. He was handed a thick packet of forms, applications for guardianship, background checks, financial disclosures, proof of housing. He needed letters of reference, statements from school personnel, medical records, character affidavits. He needed to attend parenting classes, submit to home visits, and prepare for court. It was a mountain, and Jonathan started climbing. The first person he called was Maggie Summers, the school counselor who had always treated Noah with gentle attention. She was surprised to hear from him, but listened carefully as he explained the situation. "I'm trying to become his legal guardian," he said. "I know I don't look like the best option on paper, but I'm what he has." There was a long pause before she responded. "I'll write a letter." Next came the school janitor, Lua, who despite his grouchy demeanor had seen enough to know what kind of man Jonathan was trying to be. Then the pastor at the community church, where Jonathan had only recently started attending in the back pew. Then the woman at the local diner who'd served them both breakfast on Saturdays. Slowly, painfully, a net of support began to form. Not wide, not deep, but real. He found a 2-bedroom rental on the other side of town, closer to the elementary school. It wasn't much, linoleum floors, a leaky faucet in the kitchen, but it had a fenced yard and clean walls. He painted one of the bedrooms blue and filled it with a second-hand bookshelf, a small desk, and the telescope Noah had once adored. He took photos of the space and attached them to the application. Meanwhile, Noah remained in foster care. Jonathan wasn't allowed to see him, but once a week he received updates from Patrice. "He's eating. He's doing okay in school. He misses you." Each sentence was a heartbeat in the void. Then came the letter-writing day at school. Jonathan found out about it through Maggie, who sent him a photo. Children seated at their desks, writing to family members or friends. Noah's letter wasn't shared, but Maggie said he'd spent more time on it than anyone else. He drew a planet in the corner, she said it reminded him of you. That night, Jonathan sat at the kitchen table, staring at a sheet of lined paper. He wasn't allowed to write directly, but he needed to prepare for court. The hearing was scheduled for the end of the month. It would determine whether Noah stayed in the system or returned home. His home. The parenting classes were held on the second floor of a church in Monroe, 2 towns over. Twice a week, Jonathan sat in a folding chair among young mothers, overwhelmed couples, and one elderly man trying to raise his granddaughter after his son went to jail. The instructor spoke about emotional regulation, nutrition, developmental milestones. Jonathan took notes diligently, nodding along even when the material felt like a foreign language. He didn't know the theory, but he knew Noah. He knew what scared him, what excited him, how his hands fidgeted when he was nervous, how his voice cracked when he tried to be brave. After class one night, he stood in the parking lot and looked up at the sky. The stars were faint through the haze of town lights, but he found Orion's belt and imagined Noah pointing at it, naming the stars with practiced precision. "I'm going to bring you home," he whispered to the dark. The home inspection came next. Patrice arrived with a clipboard and sharp shoes, her mouth pressed into a flat line. She walked the room slowly, asked about emergency contacts, about cleaning products, about first aid kits. She opened cabinets, tested smoke alarms, examined the fridge. When she reached the second bedroom, she paused. "You put this together for him?" "Yes." She looked at the bookshelf, the blue walls, the neatly made bed with a folded quilt. On the desk sat a small box of markers and a framed picture of the mimosa plant from Noah's science project. "He deserves his own space," Jonathan said. Patrice nodded, made a note, and said nothing more. Finally, the day of the hearing arrived. Jonathan wore his only suit, a black one with a loose collar and sleeves he had rolled at the wrist. He sat alone on the wooden bench outside the courtroom, papers stacked beside him, hands clenched. His lawyer, a soft-spoken woman named Darlene Hughes, arrived with a brief nod. Inside, the courtroom was smaller than he expected. The judge, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a silver bun, sat behind the bench with a pile of documents. Noah was not present. Neither was his foster family. Only Patrice, Jonathan, Darlene, and a clerk. Darlene began with a calm, structured presentation. Jonathan's work history, his housing situation, the letters of recommendation, the completed parenting courses. She read aloud the letter from Maggie, who had written, "Noah has suffered more loss in 10 years than most children do in a lifetime. But under Jonathan's care, I saw a child begin to bloom." Patrice acknowledged that Noah's time in foster care had been uneventful but distant. "He doesn't speak much," she said. "He's withdrawn, but he smiles when Jonathan's name is mentioned. That means something." Then came the judge's turn. "You have a conviction for felony robbery," she said. "You were released only 2 years ago." "I've stayed clean since," Jonathan said. "Why do you think you're fit to care for a child?" He paused, then met her gaze. "Because I know what it feels like to be thrown away. I know what it means to wake up and not see a future. I've made mistakes, more than I can count. But I've worked to change. And that boy, he's the first good thing I've been part of in a long time. I don't want to lose that. I don't want him to lose it either." There was a long silence. The judge looked down at her notes. "This court recognizes Mr. Brooks' efforts and his progress. However, given the circumstances, the court is not prepared to grant permanent guardianship at this time." Jonathan's breath caught. Instead, she continued, I'm granting temporary custody for a trial period of 90 days, during which Mr. Brooks will be subject to home visits, continued check-ins, and support from our department. Jonathan could barely speak. Thank you, he managed. As he left the courthouse, the sun burst through the clouds overhead like a promise. He drove straight to the foster center. Patrice met him at the door, holding a familiar backpack. He's waiting, she said. Jonathan entered the quiet hallway and turned the corner. Noah sat on a bench, knees drawn up, his glasses slightly crooked. When he saw Jonathan, he stood so quickly he nearly tripped. You came, he whispered. Jonathan knelt and opened his arms. Told you I would. Noah didn't cry, but he held on for a long time. That night, back at the house, Noah walked slowly through the front door, his steps uncertain. He paused in the living room, took in the space, then looked at Jonathan. Can I see my room? Jonathan nodded. Noah opened the door, stepped inside, and stopped. He walked to the desk, touched the telescope, then sat on the bed and ran his hand over the quilt. It's the same color as the sky, he said. It's yours. Noah looked up. Are you going to make me leave again? No, Jonathan said, not if I can help it. The boy nodded and climbed under the covers. Jonathan turned off the light, heart full. In the hallway, he allowed himself a single breath of relief. For now, they were together, and that was enough. The days that followed Noah's return were golden and delicate, like the brief stretch of warmth between winter's last breath and spring's first bloom. In the small blue bedroom with its second-hand bookshelf and telescope by the window, the boy settled in with quiet gratitude. He unpacked slowly, as if unsure the drawers would still be his the next day. Every sock folded carefully, every book placed with reverence. Jonathan watched from the doorway, not saying much, simply standing sentinel, learning again how to breathe now that the silence of the house had softened. Their routine built itself over time. Morning pancakes, even when Jonathan burned the edges. School drop-offs with lingering glances through the rearview mirror. After-dinner chess games where Noah began to win, not because Jonathan let him, but because the boy was genuinely sharper. They laughed more. They spoke freely. But beneath the surface, the world outside hadn't changed. Judgment still lingered in the aisles of the grocery store, in the sidelong glances from neighbors, in the whispered conversations that ended abruptly whenever Jonathan walked past. Noah didn't talk about the foster house. Not directly. But every now and then, he flinched at loud noises or double-checked that his bedroom door closed all the way. He never asked to visit friends, and he still walked through the world as if waiting for it to snap closed around him again. Jonathan noticed, and though he wanted to fix it, he knew better than to rush healing. Some things needed time. Some wounds had to breathe before they could scar. One Monday evening, as they sat together watching an old space documentary Noah had picked from the public library, the boy asked a question out of nowhere. Do you ever think about the people you used to know from before? Jonathan paused, his eyes still on the flickering screen. A satellite orbited silently above a blue planet. Sometimes, he answered. Not all of them, but some. Do they ever come back? Most don't. Noah turned toward him, legs folded under himself on the couch. Good. I don't want anyone from back then to come back. Jonathan muted the television. Did something happen? Noah looked away. There were kids. They were older, foster kids too, but they liked to act like they weren't, like they were better. Jonathan's chest tightened. Did they hurt you? Noah didn't answer. Later that night, after tucking him into bed, Jonathan sat alone on the porch. The stars blinked overhead, indifferent. He thought of the people who had looked away from Noah. Teachers, caseworkers, neighbors. Grown men who had failed him. Boys who had mocked him until he forgot how to speak. And somewhere in the dark knot of his chest, the old anger stirred. It didn't take long for that anger to find a target. 2 weeks into their 90-day custody period, a neighborhood girl invited Noah over to play. Her mother, Lucille, had met Jonathan during a school event and, after a long, awkward conversation, agreed to set up a play date with her daughter Emily. Noah had lit up when Jonathan told him. He spent the whole morning choosing which book to bring and made Jonathan practice knocking politely on the door. They dropped him off at noon. By 5, Jonathan returned to pick him up. The moment Noah stepped out of the house, Jonathan could tell something was wrong. The boy's smile was too tight. His arms wrapped around his torso like a shield. Lucille was behind him, flustered. "There was a little incident," she said. "Some older boys were visiting from across the street. It got a little out of hand." Jonathan knelt beside Noah. What happened? Noah didn't speak. But later that night, after the dishes were washed and the lights dimmed, he crept into Jonathan's room holding a makeup brush and a crumpled piece of paper. "They said, if I want to act like a girl, I should look like one," he whispered. Jonathan took the brush gently. The bristles were caked with cheap blush. The paper held a rough drawing, Noah in a dress, crying. Words scrawled beneath it made Jonathan's stomach lurch. "Who did this?" he asked. Noah shook his head. The next morning, Jonathan drove to Lucille's house. He parked across the street and waited. Within 10 minutes, a familiar figure emerged, Wyatt's older cousin, Darryl. Tall, cocky, and just old enough to be dangerous. He walked with a swagger Jonathan recognized from his own youth, the kind that dared the world to challenge him. Jonathan stepped out of the truck. "Hey," he called. Darryl turned, smirking. "Well, if it isn't the janitor." Jonathan walked up slowly. "You touched that boy?" "What boy?" Jonathan's voice dropped. "Noah." Darryl laughed. "Relax, we were just having fun. Kid acts like a princess, we treated him like one. Ain't our fault he can't take a joke." Jonathan's fist clenched. He hadn't hit anyone in years, but the temptation was immediate, visceral. "You think this is a joke?" he asked, stepping closer. Darryl's smirk widened. "Come on, man. Don't go soft just 'cause you got yourself a pet. He ain't even yours." Jonathan's vision tunneled. Without thinking, he slammed Darryl into the side of the house, forearm pressed against his throat. Darryl choked, eyes wide, but still managed to sneer. "There he is," he rasped. "Knew the prison boy was still in there somewhere." Voices rose from inside the house. Someone shouted. Jonathan released him and stepped back, breathing hard. Darryl coughed, holding his neck, but didn't retaliate. Later that day, Maggie showed up at his door. "I heard what happened," she said. Jonathan didn't deny it. "I lost it. Violence won't fix this." "I know. You're putting everything at risk." "I know that, too." They stood in silence for a long time. Then Maggie asked, "Did Noah see it?" "No." "Then fix it before he does." Jonathan nodded, jaw tight. He sat Noah down that evening and explained what happened, without details, but with honesty. "I lost my temper," he said, "but that wasn't your fault." Noah looked down. "Are they going to take me away again?" "No, I won't let them." The next day, they wrote a letter together to the Fairy Princess show. Noah had always dreamed of joining their fan club, but had never sent anything. Now, with Jonathan by his side, he found the courage. "My name is Noah Jefferson," he wrote. carefully forming each letter. I love your show. I think Princess Penelope is brave and smart, and I want to be like her. Some people say boys can't like princesses, but I think that's silly, because anyone can be kind. Anyone can be brave. Jonathan helped him fold the paper and seal the envelope. They mailed it together. That night, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, a knock came at the door. Shelley. Noah's biological mother stood on the porch, thinner than Jonathan remembered. Her eyes were sunken, and she swayed slightly where she stood. "I came for my son," she said. Jonathan blocked the doorway. "You're not taking him. He's mine. You abandoned him. I was sick. You still are." She tried to push past him, but he didn't budge. Noah appeared behind him, wide-eyed. "Mama?" Shelley's voice softened. "Hey, baby, I missed you." Noah didn't move. Jonathan turned. "You can visit, supervised, but that's all. I want him back. Then get clean." She hesitated, then turned and walked away. That night, Noah cried for the first time in weeks. Jonathan held him until he fell asleep, whispering over and over that he wasn't going anywhere. The battle was far from over, but the foundation had been laid. Jonathan was no longer just a man trying to fix what was broken. He was a father, and fathers fought for their sons. The morning after Shelley's unexpected return, the house was quiet. Not the comforting kind of quiet that came from shared peace, but a heavy, unsettled one that clung to the walls like humidity. Jonathan sat at the kitchen table, fingers wrapped around a mug of coffee gone cold. Across the house, Noah still slept, curled beneath the same blue quilt that now carried more meaning than either of them had ever expected. The boy had cried himself into exhaustion the night before, holding on to Jonathan with a desperate grip that spoke of fear, confusion, and the unspeakable ache that came from being caught between the promise of safety and the echo of blood ties. Jonathan had barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Shelley's face, drawn, hollow, haunted. She hadn't come with a lawyer or paperwork or even a coherent plan, just with a claim rooted in biology and a desperation that made her dangerous. He didn't trust her, not just because of her past, but because of the way Noah had frozen at the sound of her voice, the way his body had recoiled as though the air itself had turned sour. It hadn't been a reunion. It had been an invasion. By mid-morning, Noah padded into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes and saying nothing. Jonathan poured him cereal, added milk, and slid the bowl across the table without a word. They ate in silence, the only sound the soft clink of the spoon. When Noah finally looked up, his voice was a whisper. "Do I have to go back with her?" Jonathan met his eyes. "Not if I have anything to do with it." Noah nodded, then looked back down at his cereal. He didn't finish it. Later that day, Jonathan called Maggie. She answered on the first ring, and he told her everything. Shelley's sudden appearance, her demand, the way Noah had withdrawn after. Maggie listened without interrupting, and when he finally stopped, she sighed. "She won't go quietly," she said. "I know. She might not be stable, but the courts have a soft spot for biological parents. Ashley mothers." Jonathan gritted his teeth. She left him, for years. That may not matter. It did matter. It had to. Jonathan had spent months building a life for Noah, building trust, security, routine. He'd learned how to braid rope from YouTube so they could hang a tire swing. He'd memorized Noah's bedtime routine, down to the precise angle he liked his reading lamp. He'd filled that house with books and patience and a kind of love that didn't demand anything in return. But love, he knew too well, wasn't always enough for the law. Over the next few days, Shelley began calling, sometimes once, sometimes 10 times. She left voicemails, some angry, some tearful, some barely coherent. Jonathan never answered. He saved the messages, forwarded them to Maggie, and made notes of every interaction. He had to build a case, not against her, but for Noah, because he knew what Shelley didn't, that stability wasn't just a roof or a last name. It was the way Noah reached for Jonathan's hand during thunderstorms. The way he ran up the school steps without looking back because he knew Jonathan would be there after. The way he smiled, even shyly, when he came home and saw dinner waiting. But Shelley wasn't done. One morning, after dropping Noah off at school, Jonathan returned home to find the living room window shattered. Nothing was taken, but the implication was clear. He reported it to the police, filed a report, and added it to the growing folder he was building. Maggie helped him prepare for court, gathering letters from teachers, neighbors, and even Noah's pediatrician, who had noted significant improvement in the boy's health and mood since being placed with Jonathan. Noah remained quiet through it all. He went to school, he did his homework, he drew constellations and read thick science books he barely understood but loved anyway. But there was a heaviness to him now, a cautiousness that hadn't been there before. Jonathan saw it in the way he hesitated before unlocking his bedroom door at night, the way he double-checked that his backpack was zipped, as though preparing for sudden flight. And then, just when things seemed to settle, everything broke. It was a Friday. Jonathan had picked Noah up from school and taken him for ice cream. They were halfway home when a call came from Maggie, her voice tight and urgent. "She filed for emergency custody," she said. "They granted a temporary order. She's picking him up tonight." Jonathan pulled over. "What are you talking about?" "She brought in a lawyer, claimed she's completed a rehab program and has stable housing. I just found out. I'm sorry." "No," Jonathan said. "No, he's not ready. She's not ready." "I know." But knowing didn't matter. When they got home, Noah sensed something was wrong. Jonathan didn't try to hide it. He told the truth because Noah had never deserved anything less. "She's coming," he said. Noah's face crumpled. "I don't want to go." Jonathan knelt in front of him. "I know, I'm going to fight, but I can't stop her tonight." Tears filled Noah's eyes. "Can I take my books?" "You can take anything you want." They packed in silence. Just one bag, clothes, books, the telescope, small and dented, but precious. Jonathan tucked the fairy princess letter under the flap, still unopened. It had arrived 2 days ago, a pale pink envelope with glitter on the edges. Noah hadn't wanted to open it until the weekend. Now there might not be one. Shelley arrived just after 7. Her eyes were clear, her posture confident. She brought a social worker and a court order. Jonathan didn't argue. He watched as Noah stepped outside, shoulders hunched, gaze fixed on the ground. Shelley knelt and opened her arms. Noah didn't move. She took his hand. He let her. Jonathan said nothing. Not until they drove away. Then he went inside and shattered the mug Noah had made him for Father's Day. The house felt smaller now, every room echoing with the absence of small footsteps, of quiet humming, of whispered questions at bedtime. He sat in the kitchen for hours, listening to the clock tick and trying not to scream. The next morning, he called Maggie. "She won't keep him," he said. "She might." "No. She doesn't know how." "You can't prove that." "Then I will." He drove to Shelley's new apartment, a rundown unit near the edge of town. He parked across the street and waited. An hour passed, then another. Around noon, he saw Noah step outside to take out the trash. His shoulders were hunched, his face pale. And when Jonathan called his name, the boy ran to him. "She threw away my lunchbox," he said. "Jerry called me a disgrace." Jonathan's hands shook. "I want to come home," Noah whispered. "I'm going to fix it," Jonathan promised. Back in the car, he called Maggie, told her everything. She listened. Then she said what he was already thinking. "If you take him, it's kidnapping." "I don't care." "You should." But he didn't. That night, he went back, knocked on the door. Shelley answered, hair messy, eyes bloodshot. Jonathan didn't wait. "I want you to sign custody over to me." She laughed. "Why would I do that?" "Because you're hurting him. I'm his mother. You're an addict, you're unstable, and you know it." She stepped forward. "You think you're better than me? You think just because you cleaned up your mess, you get to take my son? I think I'm the only one who's been there." She shoved him. "Get out." He handed her the papers anyway. She ripped them in half. Jonathan walked away. The next morning, Child Protective Services took Noah again. Shelley had called them after the confrontation, claimed Jonathan had threatened her, that he was dangerous. It didn't matter that he hadn't touched her, that he hadn't raised his voice. The accusation was enough. He was arrested 2 hours later. They cuffed him in front of the house. Noah watched from the back seat of a government car, eyes wide, fists pressed to the window. "Don't let them take me," he cried. Jonathan looked back as they pulled away. In jail, the hours crawled. He didn't sleep, didn't eat. Then, 3 days later, Maggie appeared. She changed her statement. She said, "Told them you didn't take him, that you were trying to help." Jonathan stared at her. "The charges are being dropped. You'll be out tonight." He didn't believe it until they opened the cell. Outside, the air was sharp and cool. Maggie was waiting with her car. When they pulled into her driveway, Noah was on the porch. He ran to Jonathan, wrapped his arms around his waist, and wouldn't let go. Behind him, Shelley stepped out of the shadows. "I can't do it," she said. "I thought I could, but I can't." She looked at her son. "I love you, baby, but he's your home." Then she signed the papers, for good. 2 weeks later, Jonathan received a letter in the mail. It was from the Fairy Princess Club. Inside was a certificate, printed in bright colors and glitter. "Welcome," it read, "to the bravest, kindest club in the world." Noah hung it on his wall, and for the first time in a long time, the house felt full again. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe for more. Check out the next video and explore other powerful stories on the channel. And if it moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it.